The scorching sun beat down on Willow Evans as she swayed on her feet, the schoolhouse steps blurring before her eyes, her body finally surrendering to weeks of relentless work, poor sleep, and barely enough food to keep her standing. The small town of Cottonwood Creek, Wyoming territory, had seemed like the perfect escape from her old life in Boston, when she'd arrived 3 months earlier in the spring of 1878. The school board had been desperate for a teacher after the previous one had abruptly married and moved to California, leaving 30 children without education. Willow had answered the call, seeing it as her chance for independence after her father's financial ruin and subsequent death had left her with few options in proper society. But the reality of teaching 30 children across 8 grade levels, maintaining the schoolhouse, and living on the meager salary the town could afford had taken its toll. As the final bell rang on that Friday afternoon in June, she'd managed to dismiss the children before her vision tunneled and her knees buckled. The last thing she remembered was the feel of the rough wooden planks against her palms as she tried to catch herself, and then darkness. Miss, can you hear me?" A deep voice penetrated the fog in her mind, and Willow struggled to open her eyes. When she finally managed it, she found herself looking up at the most striking face she'd ever seen. Strong jaw covered in dark stubble, concerned blue eyes, and a shock of brown hair that fell across his forehead despite his attempts to push it back. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Don't try to move just yet." Willow realized she was being carried in strong arms, cradled against a broad chest that smelled of leather, horses, and sun-warmed cotton. Her head spun with confusion. "Who? What happened?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Name's Blake Carson, madam. I was dropping off some fence posts at the general store when I saw you collapse on the schoolhouse steps. Nobody else was around, so I came to help." Willow tried to sit up, mortified at being carried through town by a stranger, but her body betrayed her with another wave of dizziness. "Please put me down. I'm fine, just a little tired," she protested weakly. Blake snorted. "Begging your pardon, Miss Evans, but you're about as fine as my horse after a 3-day cattle drive. You're sick, exhausted, or both. Doctor's out of town for another 2 days, so I'm taking you to my place until you're steady on your feet." "You know my name?" she asked, confusion making it hard to think clearly. "Everyone knows the new schoolteacher," he said simply. "My sister's boy, Tommy, is in your class. Says you're the best teacher they've ever had." Willow felt a flush of pleasure despite her embarrassment. "Tommy Carson, he's very bright, excellent with numbers." "Gets that from his pa, not from our side," Blake said with a soft chuckle. "Now rest, my place isn't far." Too weak to argue further, Willow surrendered to the gentle rocking motion as Blake carried her beyond the town's edge. Her last coherent thought before drifting off again was that no one had carried her since she was a small child, and how unexpectedly safe it felt in this stranger's arms. When Willow next woke, she was lying on a bed in a simple but clean room. Sunlight filtered through curtains that stirred in a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of wildflowers and grass. She tried to sit up and found herself dizzy again, but less so than before. "Easy now," came Blake's voice from the doorway. He carried a tray with a steaming bowl and a cup. "You've been out for a couple hours." "I can't impose on you like this," Willow said, mortified at the situation. "I need to get back to my boarding house, Mrs. Hatcher's place." Blake asked, setting the tray on a small table near the bed. "I sent word to her that you took ill and are recovering here. My sister Beatrice is in the other room, so your reputation is safe if that's what's worrying you." The relief must have shown on her face, because he smiled a crooked, gentle smile that transformed his weathered face. I may be a rancher, Miss Evans, but I understand propriety. Now, can you eat something? You're thin as a rail, and I'm guessing that's part of why you collapsed." As if on cue, her stomach growled loudly, and Willow blushed deeply. Blake just chuckled and helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back before setting the tray across her lap. The bowl contained a rich beef stew that smelled heavenly. "Did you make this?" she asked, taking a tentative spoonful. The flavor burst across her tongue, rich and savory. "I can manage not to poison myself," Blake said with a shrug, "but this is Beatrice's doing. She's a far better cook than I'll ever be." Willow ate slowly, conscious of Blake watching her from a chair he'd pulled up near the bed. He wasn't what she'd expected from a Wyoming cowboy. His manner was direct but gentle, and though his clothes were worn, they were clean. His hands were calloused and strong, but he handled the delicate china cup with surprising grace when he poured her tea. "How long have you been in Cottonwood Creek?" she asked, trying to ease the awkwardness she felt. "Born and raised here. My pa started the ranch with just 10 head of cattle and a dream. Now the Triple C runs over 500 head on 3,000 acres." There was quiet pride in his voice. "What about you, Miss Evans? What brings a Boston lady to our little corner of Wyoming?" Willow nearly choked on her tea. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" Blake smiled. "Your accent, for one. And Tommy mentioned you told stories about growing up near the ocean. Wasn't hard to piece together." "I needed a fresh start," she said after a moment. "My father, there were financial difficulties. When he passed, I found myself with few options. Teaching was one skill I had that could earn my keep." Blake nodded, not pressing for more details, which Willow appreciated. She wasn't ready to tell this stranger how her father's gambling had cost them everything, or how close she'd come to accepting a loveless marriage proposal from her father's business partner, a man 30 years her senior, just to survive. "Well, Cottonwood Creek is lucky to have you," Blake said. "Those children needed someone who cares." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A woman with the same striking blue eyes as Blake entered, wiping her hands on an apron. "Good you're awake. I'm Beatrice Carson Fisher," she said warmly. "Blake's sister. How are you feeling, Miss Evans?" "Better, thank you," Willow said. "And please call me Willow. I can't thank you both enough for your kindness." "Nonsense," Beatrice said, feeling Willow's forehead with a cool hand. "You've been working yourself to death teaching our children. It's the least we can do." She shot her brother a look Willow couldn't interpret. "Blake hardly ever brings anyone to the ranch. You must be special." Blake warned, his neck reddening. "I'm just saying," Beatrice continued with a mischievous smile, "that my brother's been talking about the new schoolteacher for weeks, and now here you are." "I collapsed," Willow pointed out, feeling her own cheeks warm. "It's hardly a social call," Beatrice laughed. "Of course. Now eat up and rest. Dr. Willis won't be back until Sunday, so you're staying put until then." "But I have responsibilities," Willow began. "It's Friday evening," Blake interrupted gently. "You have until Monday morning to recover. The school board won't begrudge you a weekend of rest after you've worked yourself sick." Willow wanted to protest further, but exhaustion weighed on her again. The simple act of eating and conversing had depleted her energy. Blake must have noticed, because he stood and took the tray. "Rest now," he said quietly. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." Despite her intentions to remain awake and figure out how to extract herself from this awkward situation, Willow found herself drifting off again, lulled by the distant sounds of Beatrice and Blake's quiet conversation and the gentle breeze from the window. The next time Willow woke, moonlight silvered the room. She felt much stronger, her head clearer. Carefully, she sat up, relieved when no dizziness followed. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, and she drank deeply, only now realizing how thirsty she'd been. Soft guitar music drifted through the open window. Curious, Willow wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and moved carefully to look outside. Blake sat on the porch below, his back against a post, guitar in his lap. He played a melody she didn't recognize, something wistful and sweet that made her heart ache in a peculiar way. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Even in the moonlight, she could see his smile. "You're up," he said, setting the guitar aside. "Feeling better, much," she called down softly. "That was beautiful. An old song my mother used to sing," he explained. "Are you hungry? There's food I can warm up." Her stomach answered before she could, rumbling loudly enough that Blake heard it and chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes. Come down if you're steady enough, or I can bring it up." "I'll come down," Willow decided, suddenly eager to escape the confines of the bedroom. "Just give me a moment." She looked down at herself, realizing she was still in her dress, though someone had removed her shoes and loosened her corset. Beatrice, she hoped. She found her shoes beside the bed and slipped them on, then used a brush she found on the dresser to tidy her hair, which had come loose from its pins. The mirror showed her a pale face with dark circles under her eyes, but at least she looked less like death warmed over than she had earlier. The house was small but well built, with a central living area that contained a stone fireplace, comfortable-looking chairs, and bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised her with their variety. The kitchen was off to one side, where Blake was already stoking the fire in a cast-iron stove. "Your home is lovely," Willow said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship evident in the exposed beams and carefully fitted planks. "Built it myself," Blake said, a hint of pride in his voice as he placed a pot on the stove. "Took 3 years, working between cattle drives and ranch duties, but worth every splinter and smashed thumb." "You did this all yourself?" Willow couldn't keep the admiration from her voice. "Had help with raising the frame and the roof," he admitted, "but the rest was all me. Kept me busy during the long winters." "Where is your sister?" Willow asked, suddenly aware they were alone. "Went back to her place after supper. Her husband, Daniel, came to collect her. They live about a mile east of here." Blake gestured to a chair at the small kitchen table. "Sit before you fall over. You're looking steady, but no sense pushing your luck." Willow sat, watching as Blake moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency for a bachelor rancher. He warmed stew, sliced bread from a loaf wrapped in cloth, and even produced a jar of preserved peaches for dessert. "I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me," Willow admitted as he set the food before her. "At my boarding house, Mrs. Hatcher provides meals, but they're rather basic." "You mean terrible," Blake said with a grin, sitting across from her. "Everyone knows Hannah Hatcher couldn't cook to save her life. The only reason anyone boards there is because it's the only option in town." Willow laughed despite herself. "It's not that bad." "It is," Blake insisted. "Tommy stayed there once with his ma when their roof was being repaired. Said the eggs were so hard he could have used them as marbles." The easy conversation continued as Willow ate. She learned that Blake had taken over the ranch 5 years earlier when his father died, that he had 2 sisters and a brother, all with families of their own in the area. He told her about his prize bull, Augustus, who had a tendency to escape his pasture and visit the neighbors' cows, like a gentleman caller with flowers, as Blake put it. In turn, Willow shared stories of her 30 pupils, from little Mary Wilson, who was only 6 and missing her front teeth, to 17-year-old James Tucker, who pretended to hate school but secretly devoured any book Willow could provide on natural sciences. "You love teaching," Blake observed. "It shows when you talk about the children." "I do," Willow admitted. It wasn't my first choice. I'd always thought I'd marry and have children of my own to teach, but now I can't imagine doing anything else. Those children deserve someone who believes in them. Is that why you push yourself so hard? You looked half-starved when you collapsed. Willow sighed, setting down her spoon. The school board only pays me $20 a month. After my room and board at Mrs. Hatcher's, there's little left. I've been economizing. Starving yourself, you mean, Blake said bluntly. Why didn't you say something? The town would have helped. Pride, I suppose, Willow admitted. In Boston, we were wealthy once. Then suddenly we weren't, and the pity in people's eyes when they looked at me after my father's disgrace. She shook her head. I'd rather starve than see that look again. Blake reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, covered her hand with his. His palm was warm and calloused. There's a difference between charity and community, Miss Evans. Out here, we look after each other. Not out of pity, but because any one of us might need help tomorrow. The simple touch of his hand sent an unfamiliar warmth through Willow. She'd had suitors in Boston, proper young men who danced with her at balls and occasionally kissed her gloved hand. None had made her feel this strange fluttering in her chest. Abruptly, she pulled her hand away, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of their situation. It's late, she said, rising from the table. I should return to my room. Blake stood as well, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face before he masked it. Of course. You still need rest. I'll ride you back to town tomorrow if you're feeling up to it, or Sunday if you'd prefer another day of recovery. Tomorrow would be best, Willow said. I have lessons to prepare for Monday. She regretted the words as soon as she spoke them. Blake's expression closed off, and he simply nodded. I'll see you in the morning then. Sleep well, Miss Evans. As Willow climbed the stairs to the bedroom, she couldn't help feeling she'd somehow damaged something fragile that had been forming between them. The thought troubled her more than it should have for a man she'd only just met. In the morning, Willow woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, wishing for a fresh dress but grateful that at least her appearance was somewhat restored after a good night's sleep. When she came downstairs, she found Blake at the stove, his back to her. Good morning, she said. He turned, and the smile he gave her eased the awkwardness she'd been dreading. Morning. You look 100 times better. Sleep well. Better than I have in months, Willow admitted. Your guest bed is far more comfortable than my room at Mrs. Hatcher's. Glad to hear it. He gestured to the table, already set with plates and cutlery. Breakfast is almost ready. We'll get you back to town right after, as you requested. There was no reproach in his tone, but Willow felt a stab of regret nonetheless. Actually, she said slowly, I was thinking perhaps I could stay one more day if the offer still stands. You were right that I need to recover my strength before facing 30 energetic children on Monday. The smile that lit Blake's face was worth the momentary struggle with her pride. The offer absolutely stands. I'd be glad for the company. Breakfast was a cheerful affair, with Blake telling stories about his ranch hands and their exploits that had Willow laughing until her sides hurt. After they'd eaten, he gave her a tour of the ranch, a modest operation by some standards, but impressive to Willow's city-bred eyes. The barn housed a dozen horses, including Blake's personal mount, a magnificent black stallion named Midnight. The main pasture held the cattle, with several calves that approached the fence curiously when Blake whistled. Would you like to ride? Blake asked as they walked back toward the house. I have a gentle mare that would suit you, and it's a beautiful day to see the countryside. Willow hesitated. I haven't ridden since I was a girl and never Western style. Daisy will take care of you, Blake assured her, and we won't go far. The prospect of exploring beyond the immediate ranch was too tempting to resist. All right, she agreed. though I'm not dressed for riding." "Beatrice left some clothes that might fit you," Blake said. "She thought you might be more comfortable in something other than your teaching dress while you recover." The clothes, a simple skirt and blouse suitable for riding astride, fit well enough, though Beatrice was shorter than Willow. Still, it felt wonderfully freeing to be out of her formal attire. When Willow emerged from the house in her borrowed outfit, Blake's appreciative glance made her cheeks warm. True to Blake's word, Daisy was a sweet-tempered mare who seemed to understand she carried a novice. After a few uncertain moments, Willow found her balance and confidence. They rode at an easy pace, with Blake pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about growing up in the area. They stopped for lunch beside a small creek, where Blake produced bread, cheese, and apples from his saddlebag. Sitting on a blanket in the dappled shade of cottonwood trees, Willow felt more relaxed than she had in years. "Why did you become a rancher?" she asked, genuinely curious about the man beside her. Blake thought for a moment. "Never considered anything else, really. This land gets in your blood. The space, the freedom of it. Even in the hard times, drought, blizzards, cattle rustlers, I've never wanted another life." He looked at her curiously. "Do you miss Boston?" "Sometimes," Willow admitted. "I miss the libraries, the concerts. But not the society, the endless rules about who can speak to whom and what topics are appropriate for a young lady." She smiled. "Out here, I can teach boys and girls together, teach them what they need to know to survive and thrive, not just how to be decorative or wealthy." "You're different from what I expected," Blake said. "Oh, and what did you expect from a Boston schoolmarm? Someone prim and rigid, always quoting rules and looking down her nose at us uncivilized Westerners." His eyes crinkled with humor. "Instead, you're real. You care about those children for who they are, not just for whether they can recite their lessons." "I had teachers like that," Willow said softly. "All rules and no heart. I swore I'd never become one of them." They fell silent, the babble of the creek and the whisper of leaves the only sounds. Willow found herself studying Blake's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out amber highlights in his brown hair. When he turned and caught her looking, she didn't look away. "Willow," he said, her given name sounding rich and warm in his deep voice. "I know we've only just met, but I feel..." A crack of thunder interrupted him, making them both jump. Dark clouds had gathered while they talked, and now fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. "We need to get back," Blake shouted over the sudden roar of rain. He gathered their lunch things quickly while Willow folded the blanket. By the time they mounted their horses, they were both soaked. The ride back to the ranch was tense, with the horses skittish from the thunder and lightning. When the ranch house finally came into view, Willow nearly cried with relief. They stabled the horses quickly, then ran for the house, laughing despite the discomfort of their drenched clothes. Inside, Blake quickly built up the fire while Willow stood shivering on the hearth. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Blake said, his expression concerned. "You'll catch your death after being so weak yesterday. There are more of Beatrice's things upstairs, and I have a robe you can wear until your clothes dry." Willow nodded, her teeth chattering too much to argue about propriety. She changed quickly in the bedroom, hanging her wet clothes near the window where a small leak had formed. Blake's robe was enormous on her, but warm and smelling pleasantly of cedarwood. When she came back downstairs, Blake had also changed and was making tea. He dragged a small settee closer to the fire and arranged blankets on it. "Sit and warm up," he urged, handing her a steaming cup. "That storm came out of nowhere." They sat side by side, watching the fire and listening to the rain hammer on the roof. Slowly, warmth returned to Willow's limbs. She became acutely aware of Blake beside her, of the narrow space between them on the small settee. "What were you going to say?" she asked softly. Before the thunder interrupted, Blake turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "I was going to say that I feel as if I've known you much longer than a day, that there's something about you that—" He paused, searching for words. "That calls to something in me." Willow's heart hammered in her chest. "I feel it too," she admitted. "It doesn't make sense. We're from different worlds." "Are we?" Blake asked. "Or are we both just people who care deeply about what we do, who try to make life better for those around us, who value honesty and hard work?" Put that way, Willow had to admit they weren't so different after all. "I'm not sure what happens next," she confessed. "In Boston, there would be formal calls, chaperoned walks, permission sought from my father." Blake smiled. "Out here, it's simpler. I'd like to court you properly, Willow Evans. Get to know you better. Show you that a Wyoming rancher might be worthy of a Boston schoolteacher." "You carried me when I couldn't walk," Willow said softly. "Fed me when I was hungry, gave me shelter and asked for nothing in return. I'd say you've already proven your worth." Blake's gaze dropped to her lips, and Willow felt herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by a force she couldn't name. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, questioning. Willow had been kissed before, quick stolen moments with suitors, but never like this, never with this sense of coming home. When they parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you open your eyes in my arms." "I'm glad you waited until I was conscious," Willow teased, surprising a laugh from him. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, wrapped in blankets before the fire, Willow felt a peace she hadn't known in years. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams, discovering the ways their different upbringings had nevertheless led them to similar values. As evening fell, Blake cooked supper, refusing Willow's offers to help. "You're still recovering," he insisted. "Let me take care of you this once. I promise I'll let you pull your weight around here in the future." The casual assumption that there would be a future together made Willow's heart skip. It was too soon, far too soon to be thinking of such things. And yet, as they ate together by candlelight, the rain still drumming on the roof, Willow could easily imagine more evenings like this, stretching into years. On Sunday morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the sunshine. True to his word, Blake drove Willow back to town in his wagon after breakfast. As they approached Cottonwood Creek, Willow felt a curious reluctance. 2 days at the Triple C Ranch had shown her a different kind of life, one with more warmth and connection than she'd found in her months of boarding with Mrs. Hatcher. Blake must have sensed her mood. "I'll call on you properly next Saturday," he said. "Take you to dinner at the hotel. That is, if you're willing." "I'd like that very much," Willow said, smiling up at him. When they reached Mrs. Hatcher's boarding house, Blake helped Willow down from the wagon, holding her hand perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Several townspeople were about, and Willow saw curious glances cast their way. "I believe we're causing a stir," she murmured. "Let them talk," Blake said with a grin. "By tomorrow, half the town will have us engaged, and the other half will be scandalized that the schoolteacher spent 2 nights at the Carson ranch." "Oh dear," Willow said, but she couldn't summon real concern. Something had shifted in her during those 2 days, a realization that she cared far less about what people thought than about what was true and right. "Until Saturday, Miss Evans," Blake said formally, tipping his hat before climbing back into the wagon. Willow watched him drive away, already looking forward to the weekend. As she turned to enter the boarding house, she caught sight of Mrs. Hatcher's pinched expression in the window and had to stifle a laugh. Let them talk indeed. The next months passed in a whirl of school days and weekends spent increasingly in Blake's company. As summer turned to autumn, their courtship became the talk of Cottonwood Creek, with most approving of the match between the respectable rancher and the dedicated schoolteacher. Blake made a point of bringing eggs, milk, and fresh produce to the school weekly. For the children, he claimed, though everyone knew it was his way of ensuring Willow ate properly. He attended school functions, helped repair the schoolhouse roof, and donated books to the small school library. For her part, Willow found herself drawn more deeply into the community. She attended church socials and quilting bees, got to know her pupils' families, and even learned to ride well enough to visit the CCC on her own, though she always made sure to return to town before dark to preserve her reputation. In November, after a particularly festive Thanksgiving celebration at the ranch with Blake's entire extended family, he asked her to walk with him under the stars. In a clearing by the same creek where they'd picnicked during that first storm, Blake got down on one knee. "Willow Evans, I've loved you since the moment you opened your eyes in my arms. These past months have only shown me that my heart was right from the start. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Willow said without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, with all my heart." They were married on Christmas Eve in the town church, with all of Blake's family and Willow's students in attendance. Beatrice stood as Willow's maid of honor, and Tommy proudly carried the rings. In the years that followed, the CCC prospered, as did the school under Willow's continued guidance. They built an addition to Blake's house to accommodate their growing family, twin girls born a year after their wedding, followed by a son 2 years later. On summer evenings, neighbors and friends would gather on the Carsons' wide porch to hear Blake play his guitar while Willow's clear voice lifted in song. Their children grew strong and kind under the loving guidance of a father who taught them the ways of the land, and a mother who taught them the ways of the mind and heart. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the children were asleep, Blake and Willow would sit on that same porch and remember the stormy day when they'd first discovered their feelings for each other. "Did you know then?" Willow would ask. "Did you know we'd build this life together?" And Blake would always answer the same way, pulling her close and kissing her temple. "From the moment I carried you in my arms, I knew my home would never be complete without you in it. You collapsed into my life, Willow Carson, but you've lifted my heart every day since."